The universe, as any sufficiently advanced civilization will tell you after a few drinks and a lot of existential contemplation, is a remarkably inconvenient place. It's vast, cold, mostly empty, and has an annoying tendency to kill you in ways that would make a medieval torturer weep with envy. This fundamental truth was something Captain Zethrix of the Kytherian trade vessel Profitable Endeavor had learned to accept with the same resigned grace one might reserve for taxes or root canals. What Zethrix had not expected, on this particularly mundane Tuesday, though admittedly the concept of Tuesday was foreign to his species, and he was only using it because the ship's translation matrix had developed an inexplicable fondness for Earth calendars, was to encounter a human. Not just any human, mind you, a human in distress. Now, to understand why this was such an astronomically unlikely event, one must first appreciate that humans were, by galactic standards, roughly as common as a polite Vogon or a Ferengi charity drive. Most species had heard of them in the same way one might have heard of unicorns or competent bureaucrats. Theoretical concepts that made for interesting conversation but probably didn't actually exist. The Profitable Endeavor had been making its routine cargo run through the Kepler 442 system when their long-range sensors picked up what could charitably be described as a distress signal, and more accurately described as electromagnetic screaming. The source appeared to be a small, primitive craft that was currently demonstrating Newton's laws with the sort of enthusiasm typically reserved for religious fanatics or physics professors. "Sir," announced Navigation Officer Crix, whose voice carried the particular tone of someone delivering news that was simultaneously boring and catastrophic. "We're receiving what appears to be a distress call from a small vessel. The craft is, well, it's difficult to describe without using words that would violate several decency protocols." Zethrix sighed, a sound that his species produced by expelling air through specialized gill slits, creating a noise reminiscent of a deflating balloon that had given up on life. "Define difficult to describe, Crix." "The vessel appears to be held together by what our translation matrix keeps calling hope, prayer, and obscene amounts of stubbornness, sir." "That's oddly specific for a translation matrix. It also keeps muttering something about typical human engineering and asking if we have any alcohol on board, sir." Captain Zethrix had been commanding trade vessels for over 3 decades, during which time he had encountered pirates, stellar phenomena that defied several laws of physics, and once, memorably, a space station populated entirely by philosophical robots who insisted on debating the nature of existence before allowing anyone to dock. In all that time, he had learned that when the ship's computer started asking for alcohol, the situation had moved well beyond routine and was approaching the sort of thing that gets written up in incident reports that nobody believes. "Put the distress call through, Crix, and someone find out why our translation matrix is having what appears to be an existential crisis." The main view screen flickered to life, displaying the interior of what could generously be called a cockpit, and more accurately described as a metal box that someone had optimistically filled with buttons, switches, and what appeared to be several miles of exposed wiring. In the center of this technological nightmare sat a human. The human was male, appeared to be in his early 30s by the species standards, and was currently engaged in what seemed to be a spirited argument with his own control panel. His hair was disheveled in a way that suggested either great stress or a recent encounter with an electrical outlet, and his clothing bore the sort of stains that spoke of long hours spent in close proximity to machinery that leak things it probably shouldn't. "And I'm telling you, you piece of recycled garbage, that if you don't start cooperating, I'm going to take you apart with my bare hands and sell your components to a junk dealer who specializes in—" The human stopped mid-sentence as he noticed the view screen had activated. "Oh, hello there." Captain Zethrix found himself staring at the first human he had ever encountered, and his first thought was that they looked remarkably ordinary. Not in a disappointing way, but in the same way that discovering a new species of particularly unremarkable fish might be ordinary. Interesting from a scientific perspective, but hardly the stuff of legend. His second thought was that the human appeared to be addressing him directly, which suggested a level of composure that was either admirable or indicative of severe psychological trauma. "This is Captain Zethrix of the Kytherian vessel Profitable Endeavor," he said, falling back on standard protocols because, frankly, there wasn't really a protocol for first contact with mythical species who appears to be having a very bad day. "Captain?" The human's face brightened considerably. "Oh, thank whatever deities are listening. I'm David Winchester, and I am having what you might charitably call a situation." "We can see that, Mr. Winchester. Your vessel appears to be in some distress." David let out a laugh that contained roughly equal parts humor and hysteria. "Distress? Captain, my ship is held together by optimism and spite. My life support is running on fumes and sheer bloody-mindedness. My navigation computer appears to have developed a drinking problem, and I'm pretty sure my engine is running on nothing but good intentions at this point. Navigation Officer Crix looked up from his console. Sir, our sensors confirm that assessment. The human vessel's structural integrity is, well, it exists, technically speaking. That's the most encouraging thing anyone's said about this bucket of bolts in weeks, David said. Look, Captain, I don't suppose you'd be willing to give a stranded traveler a lift. I can pay, not much, but I've got some interesting salvage that might be worth something to the right buyer. Captain Zethrix considered this. On one hand, picking up random hitchhikers was generally considered poor form in space, where resources were limited and stranger danger was measured not in terms of potential muggings, but potential exposure to previously unknown pathogens, parasites, or philosophical viewpoints. On the other hand, this was a human, a genuine, authentic human, and the scientific and cultural value of such an encounter was, frankly, incalculable. There was also the matter of basic decency. The human's ship was clearly on the verge of what engineers euphemistically called rapid, unscheduled disassembly, and leaving someone to die in the void of space was the sort of thing that tended to weigh on one's conscience during those quiet moments between stars. We can accommodate you, Mr. Winchester. Prepare for transport. And, Mr. Winchester? Yes, Captain? Welcome aboard. The transporter room of the Profitable Endeavor was a testament to Kytherian engineering philosophy, which could be summarized as, if it works, don't mess with it, and if it doesn't work, hit it with something heavy until it does. The walls were lined with conduits and access panels that hummed with quiet efficiency, and the air carried the faint ozone smell that suggested machinery operating just within acceptable parameters. David Winchester materialized on the transport pad in a shower of golden light, clutching a battered duffel bag and looking around with the wide-eyed expression of someone who had just experienced their first matter-to-energy conversion and was pleasantly surprised to still exist in a coherent form. That, he announced to the room at large, was significantly less horrible than I expected. Captain Zethrix stepped forward, and David got his first good look at a Kytherian. They were tall, roughly humanoid in shape, with elongated limbs and features that suggested an evolutionary path that had involved a lot more time in water than humans had experienced. Their skin had a faint iridescent quality, like oil on water, and their large dark eyes held an intelligence that was both alien and familiar. Mr. Winchester, Zethrix said, extending what David assumed was a hand, though it had too many fingers and moved in ways that human joints simply couldn't manage. Welcome to the Profitable Endeavor. David shook the offered appendage, noting that Kytherian's skin felt like leather that had been soaked in silk. Thank you, Captain. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. When I saw your ship on sensors, I honestly thought I was hallucinating from oxygen deprivation. Our pleasure, though I must admit, encountering a human is unprecedented for us. Yeah, I get that a lot. We're not exactly common out here, are we? Officer Crix, who had been observing the exchange with scientific fascination, stepped forward. If you don't mind me asking, Mr. Winchester, what brings a human so far from your home system? Our records indicate that your species has only recently achieved interstellar capability. David's expression grew complicated. That's a long story. The short version is that I'm what you might call an independent contractor. I go places, find things, bring them back to people who are willing to pay for them. Usually things that are difficult to find or in inconvenient locations. A salvage operator. Zethrix nodded, understanding. A dangerous profession, but often profitable. Exactly. Though lately it's been more dangerous than profitable, if I'm being honest. Over the next several days, as the Profitable Endeavor continued its route through the outer systems, David proved to be an entertaining and surprisingly knowledgeable guest. He had stories of his adventures that ranged from the merely improbable to the utterly fantastic, and he told them with the kind of casual confidence that suggested either vast experience or a remarkable talent for creative fiction. More importantly, he proved to be genuinely useful. When the ship's main environmental processor developed a fault that had the engineering crew baffled, David took one look at the problem and suggested a fix that involved rerouting power through a secondary system in a way that violated approximately 17 safety protocols but worked perfectly. How did you know to do that? Chief Engineer Vlox asked, staring at the readings that showed their environmental systems running more efficiently than they had in months. David shrugged. Sometimes when you're stuck in a tin can in the middle of nowhere with nothing but spare parts and bad ideas, you learn to think creatively. Humans have this thing where we tend to solve problems by trying whatever seems like it might work, and hoping for the best. That sounds terrifying, Flock said. It's surprisingly effective, though. Over the course of the week-long journey to the next port, David became something of a fixture on the bridge. His observations about stellar phenomena were surprisingly insightful. His suggestions for optimizing their routes saved them almost 2 days of travel time, and his running commentary on the various absurdities of space travel kept the crew entertained during the long, quiet hours between stars. "You know," he said one evening as they watched a binary star system perform its ancient dance through the view screen, "I've traveled with a lot of different species over the years, and I have to say, you folks are some of the most decent people I've met." Captain Zethrix, who was nursing a cup of something that the replicators insisted was tea, but tasted more like hot pond water, looked surprised. "Decent? Yeah. I mean, you could have just left me out there. Would have been easier, certainly safer. But you didn't. You picked up a complete stranger, fed him, gave him a place to sleep, and haven't asked for anything significant in return. That's not common in my experience." "Basic decency shouldn't be uncommon," Crix observed. "Shouldn't be, no. But it is. Trust me. I've been to places where they'd have stripped my ship for parts and left me floating in vacuum without a second thought." The conversation moved on to other topics, but something about David's words stuck with the crew. There was a quality to the way he spoke about kindness that suggested it was a rare and precious thing in his experience, something to be treasured rather than expected. When they finally reached Kepler Station, a massive commercial hub that served as a crossroads for a dozen different trade routes, David gathered his belongings and prepared to disembark. "Captain," he said, standing in the airlock with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, "I can't thank you enough. You literally saved my life." "Think nothing of it, Mr. Winchester. Safe travels." David paused, then reached into his bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a communicator and a piece of abstract art. "This is a long-range transmitter. Human design, but it's been modified to work with Galactic Standard Communication protocols. If you ever need help, I mean really need help, life or death kind of stuff, use this. Transmit on the frequency that's programmed into the memory, and I'll come running." Zethrix took the device, turning it over in his hands. It was clearly human technology, but the modifications were sophisticated, clearly the work of someone who understood both human engineering and galactic standards. "Mr. Winchester, this is unnecessary. We were simply doing what anyone should do." "Maybe," David said, "but not everyone would have. Keep it, Captain. You never know when you might need a human's particular brand of creative problem-solving." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the crowds and chaos of Kepler Station like a particularly interesting ghost. Captain Zethrix kept the transmitter, not because he expected to ever use it, you understand, but because it seemed rude to throw away a gift from the first human he had ever met. He tucked it into his personal effects locker, where it sat alongside a collection of other mementos from his years in space. A crystallized flower from the gardens of Vega 7, a fragment of metal from a supposedly indestructible battleship that had been destroyed anyway, and a book of poetry written in a language that had been extinct for 3 centuries. The device became something of a conversation piece. When other captains visited the ship, Zethrix would sometimes mention his encounter with a human, and inevitably someone would ask to see the transmitter. It was always met with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. Skepticism because, honestly, what were the odds that a single human could be of any significant help to a fully crewed trade vessel? And fascination because it was a genuine piece of human technology, which was about as rare as a politician telling the truth. Years passed. The profitable Endeavour continued its routes, carrying cargo from system to system, navigating the complex web of galactic commerce with the sort of practiced efficiency that comes from decades of experience. Zethrix was promoted to senior captain status. Crix was transferred to a larger vessel as chief navigation officer, and the crew roster changed as crew members retired, transferred, or decided to pursue other careers that didn't involve spending months at a time in a metal tube hurtling through the void. The transmitter remained in Zethrix's locker, forgotten by everyone except the captain himself, who occasionally found himself wondering what had become of David Winchester and whether the human was still out there somewhere, solving problems with creative thinking and stubborn determination. The answer to that question, as it turned out, was considerably more complex than Zethrix might have imagined. David Winchester had not, as one might assume, simply disappeared into the vast anonymity of galactic civilization. Humans, as it happened, had a remarkable talent for making impressions that lasted far longer than anyone expected. In the 5 years since his encounter with the profitable Endeavour, David had continued his work as an independent salvage operator, but his reputation had grown considerably. The turning point had come when he had responded to a distress call from a Nexari colony ship that had suffered catastrophic engine failure in the Tau Ceti system. The Nexari were an aquatic species known for their advanced biotechnology and their tendency to panic when things went wrong. Their colony ship, the Living Reef, carried over 50,000 civilians and was drifting helplessly toward the system's primary star with life support failing and no way to restart their biological engines. The Galactic Rescue Service had declared the situation hopeless. The ship was too massive to tow, too complex to repair quickly, and too close to the star to allow for evacuation. They had begun making arrangements for what they euphemistically called humanitarian mitigation, which meant writing off the 50,000 Nexari as an acceptable loss. David Winchester had other ideas. Working with a small team of salvage specialists and a borrowed heavy-lift freighter, he had managed something that the experts had declared impossible. Using a combination of conventional engineering, human intuition, and what could only be described as weapons-grade audacity, he had jury-rigged a replacement engine system using parts from 3 different ship classes, powered it with portable fusion reactors that were never meant to be used in that configuration, and somehow convinced the whole contraption to work long enough to get the Living Reef to safety. The rescue had made David something of a celebrity in certain circles, but more importantly, it had established his reputation as someone who could solve problems that others considered unsolvable. Word spread through the informal networks that connected salvage operators, rescue specialists, and other professionals who worked in the gray areas between established procedures and outright impossibility. Over the following years, David had built a network of contacts that spanned dozens of species and hundreds of star systems. He had saved stranded mining operations, recovered lost cargo from quantum storms, and once, memorably, figured out how to communicate with a sentient nebula that had been holding an entire trade route hostage because nobody had bothered to ask it politely to move. He had also, though he rarely talked about it, begun keeping track of the people who had helped him along the way. The Kytherians who had picked him up when his ship was falling apart. The vegan engineers who had taught him about quantum mechanics. The Rigelian medic who had patched him up after a particularly unfortunate encounter with an unstable energy field. The list went on, and David Winchester had an excellent memory for debts of gratitude. The call came on a Tuesday, though once again the concept of Tuesday was purely academic when one was dealing with interstellar distances and relativistic time dilation. Captain Zethrix was in his quarters, reviewing cargo manifests and trying to figure out why the ship's replicators had developed an obsession with producing everything in varying shades of purple, when his personal communication system activated with the distinctive chime that indicated an emergency transmission. He opened the channel, expecting to hear from either ship's operations, or possibly one of the trading companies that occasionally needed to reroute cargo on short notice. Instead, he found himself looking at a face he hadn't seen in 5 years, though it looked considerably more haggard than he remembered. "Captain Zethrix," David Winchester said, and his voice carried a weight that spoke of exhaustion and desperation. "I need to call in that favor." Zethrix felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Mr. Winchester, it's been some time." "What's the situation?" "The situation," David said, "is that the hegemony has decided to make an example out of a human colony world called Haven's Rest. They're claiming that the colonists violated some obscure territorial treaty, but really it's because Haven's Rest has mineral deposits that the hegemony wants to get their hands on without paying for them." The hegemony. Zethrix knew of them, of course. Everyone in this part of the galaxy did. They were a militaristic alliance of species that had decided that the best way to handle galactic politics was through the application of overwhelming force and the sort of bureaucratic doublespeak that could make a perfectly reasonable treaty sound like a declaration of war. "Mr. Winchester, I'm not sure what you think a single trade vessel can do against the hegemony." "I'm not asking you to fight them, Captain. I'm asking you to help me get to Haven's Rest before they do. The colonists are trying to evacuate, but they don't have enough ships, and the hegemony fleet is going to be there in less than a week. I've got access to a few vessels, but not nearly enough to evacuate 30,000 people. Zethrix stared at the screen, processing what David was asking. "You want me to help you evacuate an entire colony world?" "Yes." "In defiance of a hegemony military operation?" "Yes." "Mr. Winchester, that would be—" "I cannot overstate how dangerous and illegal such an action would be." David's expression didn't change. "Captain, 5 years ago you told me that basic decency shouldn't be uncommon. 30,000 people are going to die because they had the audacity to live on a planet that someone else wants. If that's not a situation that calls for basic decency, I don't know what is." Zethrix found himself in the uncomfortable position of having his own words quoted back to him in a context that made them sound like a moral imperative rather than casual conversation. He looked at David's face on the screen, older, more weathered, but with eyes that held the same straightforward honesty that had impressed him 5 years ago. The profitable endeavor can carry perhaps 200 passengers in emergency conditions, Mr. Winchester. That's hardly going to make a significant difference. Captain, David said. And now there was something else in his voice. Not just desperation, but a kind of quiet confidence that suggested he knew something that Zethrix didn't. I'm not asking you to evacuate 30,000 people by yourself. I'm asking you to help me, and I've learned a few things about asking for help over the years. Before Zethrix could ask what he meant, David's image on the screen was joined by another face. A Rigelian female with the distinctive blue-tinted skin and enlarged cranium of her species. Captain Zethrix, the Rigelian said. I am Commander Veltar of the research vessel Infinite Curiosity. Mr. Winchester has explained the situation, and we would be honored to assist in this humanitarian effort. A third screen opened, showing a being that Zethrix didn't immediately recognize, something reptilian with scales that shifted color as he watched. Captain Zethrix, I am ship leader Siskhthan of the Draconian Transport Scale of Justice. The human Winchester once saved my clutchmates from a quantum storm. My ship and my crew are at your service. More screens opened. A Centaurian captain whose vessel had been pulled from a black hole's event horizon by David's innovative use of probability manipulation. A vegan engineer whose entire research station had been saved when David figured out how to reverse a catastrophic containment failure. An Andromedan collective mind whose exploration ship had been rescued from an encounter with hostile extra-dimensional entities. One by one, they appeared on the screen, until Zethrix found himself looking at nearly 24 ship captains from a dozen different species, all of whom had apparently answered David Winchester's call for help. Captain, David said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly over the communication link. This is what I've learned about asking for help. If you treat people with decency and respect, if you help them when they need it and ask for nothing in return, then when you need help, they remember, and they answer the call. Zethrix stared at the collection of faces on his screen. Captains and crew leaders from across known space, representing some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, all gathered together because a single human had once shown them kindness. Mr. Winchester, he said slowly, exactly how many ships are we talking about? David's smile was the first genuinely cheerful expression Zethrix had seen from him during the entire conversation. Captain, we're talking about a fleet. The assembled fleet that converged on the Haven's Rest system 3 days later was, by any reasonable measure, completely impossible. It shouldn't have existed, first of all, because organizing such a diverse collection of vessels and crews should have taken months of coordination, negotiation, and planning. Different species had different technical standards, different communication protocols, different ideas about everything from acceptable risk levels to appropriate meal schedules. Getting them all to work together should have been like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra made up entirely of tone-deaf musicians who spoke different languages and had never seen sheet music. It shouldn't have worked, second of all, because there was no central authority to coordinate their efforts. No military command structure, no corporate hierarchy, no governmental organization to issue orders and resolve disputes. Just David Winchester, operating from the bridge of a salvage vessel that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and good intentions, somehow managing to coordinate the efforts of 47 ships and over 3,000 crew members. And it absolutely shouldn't have been effective, because the entire operation was being planned and executed by beings who had never worked together before, using equipment that wasn't designed to interface with alien technology, following a plan that seemed to consist primarily of, get there fast and figure it out as we go. The fact that it worked anyway was either a testament to the power of shared moral purpose or evidence that the universe had a sense of humor that ran toward the surreal. Captain Zethrix stood on the bridge of the profitable Endeavor, watching the tactical display that showed their position in the Haven's Rest system. The planet itself was a blue-green marble hanging in space, surrounded by the controlled chaos of an evacuation in progress. Civilian transports shuttled back and forth between the surface and the various ships that had arrived to help, while faster courier vessels spread out through the system to establish early warning networks and communication relays. Captain, Navigation Officer Crix reported. He had been reassigned to the profitable Endeavor specifically for this mission, along with several other experienced officers who had volunteered to help. We're receiving confirmation from the surface. Colonial Governor Hendricks reports that evacuation is proceeding faster than expected. At current rate, they estimate all civilians will be off-planet within 36 hours. Zethrix nodded, then activated the ship-to-ship communication system. Mr. Winchester, this is Zethrix. What's our status on the hegemony fleet? David's voice came through the speakers with the characteristic distortion of long-range communication. Our scouts report they're still approximately 48 hours out, Captain. We should have enough time, assuming nothing goes wrong. And if something does go wrong? There was a pause, and when David spoke again, there was something in his voice that Zethrix had learned to recognize as the human equivalent of a predatory smile. Captain, I've been doing this kind of work for a long time, and I've learned that when humans are involved, something always goes wrong. The trick is making sure it goes wrong in a way that works out in your favor. As if summoned by David's words, the long-range sensors chose that moment to detect something that made Chief Science Officer Trill's antennae twitch with alarm. Captain, Trill announced, I'm reading massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, heavy cruiser class or larger. The hegemony fleet appears to have arrived early. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of equipment and the soft clicking sounds that Kytherians made when they were thinking rapidly. Zethrix looked at the sensor readings, processing the implications. The hegemony fleet was 12 hours ahead of schedule, which meant they had approximately 18 hours less time than they needed to complete the evacuation. Mr. Winchester, he said into the communication system, we have a problem. I see it, Captain. How many ships are we looking at? Trill consulted his readings. 16 vessels, Captain. 12 heavy cruisers, 3 dreadnoughts, and what appears to be a command carrier. They're moving in standard hegemony battle formation. David's voice was quiet when he responded. That's more than I expected. They're really serious about this. On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet appeared as a cluster of red dots moving steadily toward the inner system. Even at their current speed, they would reach Haven's Rest in less than 10 hours. The evacuation ships, meanwhile, appeared as a scattered collection of green dots, most of them small civilian transports that would be defenseless against military-grade weapons. Mr. Winchester, Zethrix said, I don't believe we can complete the evacuation in time. No, David replied. Probably not. Which means we need to buy ourselves some time. How exactly do you propose to do that? Our fleet is impressive, but it's made up of civilian vessels. We have cargo haulers, research ships, and passenger transports. Against 16 military vessels. Captain, David interrupted. Remember what I said about things going wrong in ways that work out in your favor? Yes. I think it's time for a demonstration of human problem-solving techniques. The thing about humans, as any xenobiologist who had studied them would tell you, is that they had evolved on a planet that seemed to be actively trying to kill them. Earth was a world of natural disasters, predatory wildlife, and environmental conditions that would make a Vulcan weep. As a result, humans had developed certain psychological traits that other species found either admirable or terrifying, depending on their perspective. One of these traits was an absolute refusal to accept that a situation was hopeless, until they had exhausted every possible option, and then a few more options that probably shouldn't have been possible at all. Another was a talent for looking at seemingly unrelated resources and finding ways to combine them into solutions that violated several laws of physics and most principles of common sense. David Winchester, floating in the command center of his salvage vessel. Determination, a name that his friends had always said was either perfectly appropriate or deeply ironic, depending on how his latest scheme worked out, was about to demonstrate both of these traits on a scale that would either save 30,000 lives or get them all killed in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. All ships, he broadcast on the fleet-wide communication channel. This is Winchester. I need everyone to listen very carefully, because what I'm about to propose is going to sound completely insane. On the bridge of the Profitable Endeavor, Captain Zethrix exchanged glances with his crew. In his experience, when a human prefaced a plan by saying it was going to sound insane, it was generally wise to brace for something truly spectacular. The hegemony fleet is expecting to find a collection of helpless civilian vessels trying to run away, David continued. They're not expecting us to fight because, frankly, we can't win a straight fight against 16 military vessels. But here's the thing about expectations. They can be used against you. On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet continued its steady approach, maintaining the sort of disciplined formation that spoke of professional military training and absolute confidence in their superiority. I've been studying hegemony tactical doctrine, David said, and they have a weakness. They're bureaucratic. They follow procedures. They do things by the book because the book has been written by people who survived previous battles. But the thing about books is that they're written based on past experience. And I don't think anyone has written a chapter on what to do when a human starts improvising. Zethrix activated his private communication link to David's ship. Mr. Winchester, what exactly are you proposing? Captain, I'm proposing that we make the hegemony think they're facing something completely different than what they're actually facing. I'm proposing that we turn our entire fleet into the galaxy's largest magic trick. Magic trick? Misdirection, Captain. We make them look one way while we do something else entirely. And to do that, I need to borrow your ship's industrial replicators, about half of your engineering crew, and approximately 3,000 tons of refined metals from your cargo hold. Zethrix felt the familiar sensation of events spinning beyond his control that he had learned to associate with human plans. Mr. Winchester, my cargo hold contains rare earth elements worth approximately 50 million credits. Captain, those rare earth elements won't be worth anything if we don't live long enough to sell them. Besides, I'm not asking you to give them up. I'm asking you to let me turn them into something else temporarily. Such as? David's voice carried the sort of enthusiasm that suggested he was either about to solve their problems or make them exponentially worse. Such as the most convincing fake weapons array that the galaxy has ever seen. Over the next 6 hours, as the hegemony fleet continued its approach, and the evacuation ships worked frantically to remove the last of Haven's Rest's civilian population, something unprecedented began to take shape in the space around the colony world. Working with a coordination that shouldn't have been possible, the 47 ships of David's improvised fleet began to transform themselves. Cargo haulers extended manipulator arms and attached hastily constructed metal frameworks to their hulls, creating the appearance of weapon mounts. Research vessels deployed their sensor arrays in configurations that, from a distance, looked remarkably like targeting systems. Passenger transports reconfigured their communication equipment to broadcast energy signatures that resembled military-grade shields and defensive systems. The profitable endeavor served as the centerpiece of the deception, its industrial replicators working at maximum capacity to produce components that looked like the housings for weapons that could level cities. Captain Zethrix watched from his bridge as his cargo hold was systematically emptied and converted into props for the most elaborate bluff in recorded history. Captain, Chief Engineer Vlox reported, the human engineering team has finished installing the false torpedo bays. From external sensors, they should appear to be fully functional quantum warhead launchers. And they're actually empty tubes with lights in them, sir. Very convincing lights, but still just lights. On the main view screen, the transformed fleet looked like something from a military strategist's nightmares. What had been a collection of civilian vessels now appeared to be a formidable battle group, bristling with weapons and protected by overlapping shield matrices that registered on sensors as military-grade defensive systems. The reality, of course, was that the entire fleet's actual combat capability could be summarized as strongly worded messages and the occasional thrown wrench. Mr. Winchester, Zethrix said into the communication system, I have to ask, what happens when they realize that our weapons are fake? Captain, David replied, the beauty of a good bluff is that if you do it right, they never get close enough to realize it's fake. The hegemony fleet, meanwhile, had detected the presence of what appeared to be a significant military force and was responding exactly as David had predicted they would. They had slowed their approach, deployed in a more defensive formation, and were undoubtedly transmitting reports back to their command structure about the unexpected development. This is Admiral Kresh of the Hegemony Third Fleet, came a transmission on standard diplomatic frequencies. Unknown vessels in the Haven's Rest system. You are in violation of hegemony territorial sovereignty. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. David's response was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that everyone in the system could hear it. Admiral Kresh, this is Commander Winchester of the Independent Defense Coalition. We are conducting a humanitarian evacuation operation under the protection of the Galactic Accords on civilian protection. Any interference with this operation will be considered an act of aggression against multiple sovereign species. There was a long pause. Then, Commander Winchester, our records show no Independent Defense Coalition. Identify your command authority. Admiral, David replied with the sort of calm confidence that suggested he was reading from official documentation rather than making it up as he went along. The Independent Defense Coalition operates under emergency mandate protocols. Our authority derives from the collective defense agreements of our member species, as authorized by Section 12 of the Interspecies Mutual Aid Compact. Captain Zethrix listened to this exchange with growing amazement. There was, as far as he knew, no such thing as an independent defense coalition, no Section 12 of any interspecies mutual aid compact, and certainly no emergency mandate protocols that would give a human salvage operator authority to command a fleet of military vessels. The fact that David was delivering these fabrications with complete conviction was either a testament to human acting ability or evidence that he had completely lost touch with reality. Stand by for verification, Admiral Kresh responded. And here, Zethrix realized, was the brilliant core of David's plan. The hegemony was bureaucratic, They would spend hours, possibly days, trying to verify the existence of an organization that didn't exist, checking legal codes for authorities that had never been written, and consulting with their command structure about how to handle a situation that no one had ever encountered before. During which time the evacuation would continue. "Mr. Winchester," Zethric said quietly on a private channel, "you are either a genius or completely insane." "Captain," David replied, "I've found that those two things aren't always mutually exclusive." The next 8 hours passed in a state of surreal tension. The hegemony fleet held position at the edge of the system, apparently waiting for their bureaucrats to sort out the legal implications of David's fictional authority. The evacuation fleet continued its work, with the last of Haven's Rest's civilians being loaded onto transports under the protection of weapons that didn't exist and shields that were really just very sophisticated light shows. David, meanwhile, had discovered that commanding a fictional military operation was significantly more complex than he had anticipated. In addition to maintaining the bluff with the hegemony, he was coordinating the movements of 47 ships, managing supply transfers between vessels, and dealing with the sort of technical problems that arose when you tried to make cargo haulers look like battleships. "Commander Winchester," came a transmission from one of the Rigelian research vessels. "We're having difficulty maintaining the power signature for our false plasma cannon arrays. Our generators weren't designed for this kind of load." "Understood, Infinite Curiosity. Route non-essential power from your laboratory equipment. If anyone asks, tell them you're running full-spectrum analysis protocols. But Commander, that would require us to actually shut down our experiments." "Dr. Veltar, right now our biggest experiment is seeing whether we can convince a hegemony admiral that a collection of civilian ships is actually a battle fleet. Everything else is secondary." On the bridge of the Profitable Endeavor, Chief Science Officer Trill was monitoring the hegemony fleet's communications traffic with the sort of professional interest that came from years of intelligence gathering. "Captain," he reported, "they're definitely confused. I'm intercepting transmissions that suggest they're trying to verify our legal authority through at least 6 different bureaucratic channels." "How long do you think that will take?" Zethric asked. "Given hegemony administrative efficiency, anywhere from 6 hours to 6 months, depending on whether the proper forms get filed correctly." Navigation Officer Crix looked up from his station. "Captain, we're receiving confirmation from the surface. Governor Hendricks reports that the last civilian transport has departed Haven's Rest. The evacuation is complete." Zethric felt something that might have been relief, if relief was compatible with the growing certainty that they were all about to be blown into their component atoms by 16 military vessels. "Mr. Winchester, the evacuation is complete. What's our exit strategy?" "Exit strategy, Captain? How do we leave without the hegemony fleet realizing that we're not actually a military force?" "Ah," David said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he had been hoping no one would ask that particular question. "About that, I'm working on it." "Mr. Winchester, working on it is not the same as having a plan. Captain, in my experience, most of the best plans start with working on it and evolve from there. The key is to keep working on it until something viable emerges." Before Zethric could respond to this deeply unsatisfying explanation, the communication system activated with an incoming transmission from the hegemony fleet. "Commander Winchester," Admiral Kresch's voice carried a new note of authority. "We have completed our verification process. There is no record of an independent defense coalition, no Section 12 of the Interspecies Mutual Aid Compact, and no emergency mandate protocols that would grant you the authority you claim." The bridge fell silent. Even the ship's environmental systems seemed to quiet, as if the machinery itself was holding its breath. "Admiral," David replied, and his voice was steady. "You are correct." Zethric stared at the communication panel. Had David just admitted that the entire operation was a bluff? "I am not the commander of a military force," David continued. "I am a human civilian who organized a humanitarian mission to save the lives of 30,000 innocent people. The ships with me are not warships. They're cargo haulers, research vessels, and passenger transports that have been modified to look like military vessels." On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet began to move, their formation shifting from defensive to what was unmistakably an attack pattern. "However," David said, "I think there's something you should consider before you decide how to respond to this information." Admiral Kresch's response was predictably curt. "And what would that be?" "Admiral, you just spent 8 hours being held at bay by a fake fleet commanded by a human salvage operator with no military training and a collection of civilian volunteers. When this gets out, and it will get out, because there are news correspondents from 17 different species covering this story, how do you think that's going to look for the reputation of the Hegemony Third Fleet?" There was a long silence. On the other hand, David continued, if you let us leave peacefully, the official record will show that you encountered a humanitarian operation and, in accordance with the highest traditions of galactic civilization, allowed it to proceed without interference. You'll be remembered as the admiral who chose mercy over conquest, diplomacy over destruction. Another pause. Then, you are asking me to let you make fools of my fleet. Admiral, I'm asking you to let us leave with our lives and our dignity intact. In return, I'm offering you the chance to be remembered as someone who chose to do the right thing when it mattered. The communication channel went silent. On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet held position, neither advancing nor retreating. Captain Zethryx found himself holding his breath, waiting to see whether a human's appeal to decency would be enough to prevent a massacre. Commander Winchester, Admiral Kresh said finally, you have 30 minutes to clear the system. If any of your vessels are still within hegemony space after that time, they will be fired upon. David's relief was audible in his voice. Thank you, Admiral. We'll be gone in 20. The evacuation fleet scattered like seeds on the wind. The 47 ships that had come together to save Haven's Rest dispersed across the galaxy, carrying their passengers to new homes and new lives. Some went to established colonies that had volunteered to take in refugees. Others headed for frontier worlds where the colonists could start fresh, building new communities from scratch. A few, at their own request, were taken to Earth, where they would be welcomed as the first large-scale alien immigrants to the human homeworld. Captain Zethryx found himself back on the bridge of the profitable Endeavor, watching the stars shift past the viewscreen as they made their way toward their original destination. His cargo hold was empty. The rare Earth elements had been left behind, transformed into fake weapons that were now drifting in space around Haven's Rest like the remnants of some cosmic joke. Captain, Navigation Officer Crick said, we're receiving a transmission from Mr. Winchester. Put him through. David's face appeared on the main view screen, and for the first time since Zethryx had met him, the human looked genuinely relaxed. He was aboard what appeared to be a passenger transport, surrounded by the sort of cheerful chaos that suggested a successful evacuation in progress. Captain Zethryx, David said, I wanted to thank you. What you did, what all of you did, it mattered. 30,000 people are alive because you were willing to take a risk for strangers. Mr. Winchester, Zethryx replied, I think we should be thanking you. Your plan was remarkable. David laughed. My plan was completely insane and should never have worked. The fact that it did work says more about the people who helped than it does about the plan itself. What will you do now? Now? I'm going to help these folks get settled in their new homes, and then I'm going to go back to doing what I've always done. Finding people who need help and figuring out how to help them. And the transmitter? Do you still have others like it? David's smile was mysterious. Captain, over the past few years, I've learned that there are a lot of good people in this galaxy. People who are willing to help when help is needed, who will take risks for strangers, who believe that doing the right thing matters more than following regulations. He paused, looking directly at Zethryx through the screen. I've given a lot of those people transmitters, Captain. And I've learned that when you ask good people for help, they don't just come themselves, they bring friends. The transmission ended, leaving Zethryx alone with his thoughts and a bridge full of crew members who had volunteered for a mission that could have gotten them all killed and who would, he suspected, volunteer again if asked. He thought about David Winchester's words, about networks of good people, and the kind of help that brought friends along with it. He thought about the 47 ships that had answered a human's call for aid, about the thousands of crew members who had risked their lives for people they had never met. And he thought about the small device in his personal locker, the transmitter that David had given him 5 years ago, and wondered how many others like it were scattered across the galaxy, waiting for the day when someone would need help badly enough to call. The universe, Captain Zethryx reflected, was still a remarkably inconvenient place. It was vast, cold, mostly empty, and had an annoying tendency to kill you in ways that would make a medieval torturer weep with envy. But it was also full of people who were willing to help when help was needed. And that, he thought, made all the inconvenience bearable. Epilogue. The Network. 5 years later, when historians tried to analyze what had become known as the Haven's Rest incident, they would focus on the tactical innovations, the diplomatic implications, and the legal precedents that had emerged from the affair. They would write extensively about the first recorded instance of a civilian fleet successfully bluffing a military force, about the humanitarian principles that had motivated the operation, and about the complex web of interspecies cooperation that had made it possible. What they would miss, largely because it was too dispersed and too informal to show up in official records, was the true legacy of David Winchester's appeal for help, The network that had formed around him continued to grow. The captains and crew members who had participated in the Haven's Rest evacuation returned to their regular duties, but they carried with them the memory of what they had accomplished together. They talked about it with their colleagues, their friends, their families. They told stories about the human who had organized an impossible mission, and the people who had made it possible. And when those colleagues and friends and family members encountered situations where help was needed, a stranded exploration team, a colony facing natural disaster, a research station that had lost contact with the outside world, they remembered those stories. They remembered that sometimes the right thing to do was to take a risk for strangers. The transmitters that David had distributed over the years became something more than emergency communication devices. They became symbols of a promise, a commitment to the idea that when someone called for help, the call would be answered. Not always successfully, not always in time, but always with the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, there were people who cared enough to try. The universe remained, as Captain Zethrix had observed, a remarkably inconvenient place. But it was also, increasingly, a place where no one had to face those inconveniences alone. And perhaps, the historians would eventually conclude, that was the most important innovation of all. End of story. And that, esteemed colleagues, is why we should initiate aggressive action against the humans before they spread beyond their solar system, concluded Ambassador Krizax, his 7 eyes blinking in sequence as he gestured with appendages that looked like a nightmarish fusion of crab claws and jellyfish tentacles. Lieutenant David Miller fought the urge to shift uncomfortably in his seat. The holographic camouflage field generator hidden beneath his formal attire was working perfectly. To everyone else in the grand auditorium of the Galactic Conclave's floating citadel, he appeared to be Zorthul, a mid-level bureaucrat from the Andromeda Mining Consortium. Still, having just sat through a 90-minute presentation on the most efficient ways to exterminate his entire species, wasn't exactly how he'd planned to spend his Tuesday. Questions? Krizax's voice boomed through the amphitheater. David watched as various appendages, tentacles, and light-emitting organs rose throughout the audience. He'd been embedded in the Conclave for almost 8 Earth months now, gathering intelligence for the United Earth Defense Force. This particular seminar, officially titled Preemptive Solutions to the Human Expansion Problem, was the intelligence goldmine he'd been waiting for. A Vrexian diplomat with skin like polished obsidian stood. Ambassador, your proposal to introduce a modified strain of Arcturian flesh-melting bacteria into Earth's water supply is certainly thorough. But have we exhausted diplomatic options? The humans have shown remarkable adaptability. Perhaps they could be useful vassals. David suppressed a smile. The Vrexians had always been the most reasonable of the Conclave species, which wasn't saying much considering their idea of a peace offering was only enslaving a species rather than eradicating it. Krizax made a sound like a garbage disposal choking on silverware, the Quolothian equivalent of derisive laughter. Useful. Need I remind the assembly of the Henderson incident? A collective shudder passed through the auditorium. David bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. The Henderson incident had become infamous across 17 galaxies, despite being the result of one drunk Florida man with a stolen alien scooter and an unreasonable amount of fireworks. Humans, Krizax continued, are uniquely dangerous precisely because they appear so harmless. They lack natural defenses. Their physical forms are fragile. Their lifespans are laughably brief. Yet somehow they continue to survive catastrophes that would extinguish most sentient species. A holographic display lit up behind the ambassador, showing a timeline of human disasters, plagues, world wars, climate crises, reality television. They are like parasites, Krizax hissed, that grow stronger with each attempt to exterminate them. This is why the Quolothian Dominion proposes immediate action. David casually tapped his wrist device, recording everything. Earth scientists would have a field day analyzing the various extinction plans being proposed. More importantly, they'd finally have confirmation of what humanity had long suspected. The Galactic Conclave saw them as a problem to be solved rather than potential allies. Another alien rose, this one a Zethkari, whose evolutionary path had resulted in something resembling a cross between a praying mantis and a grand piano. David recognized him as General Vexcor, Supreme Commander of the Conclave's military forces. The ambassador's enthusiasm is noted, Vexcor said, his voice like gravel in a blender. However, I must caution against underestimating these creatures. Our preliminary infiltration units have returned with disturbing reports. The general's mandibles clattered, a sign of Zethkari agitation. Humans have an alarming capacity for what they call improvisation. One of our reconnaissance drones was repurposed by a juvenile human to deliver small circular food items in exchange for currency. Pizza delivery. David murmured under his breath. Furthermore, Vexcor continued, they appear to form emotional attachments to anything, regardless of whether it possesses consciousness. Many have symbiotic relationships with quadrupedal fur-covered creatures that serve no practical purpose. Others speak to plants. One of our field agents observed a human apologizing to a table after colliding with it. A Cerulean scientist with translucent skin rose next. General, with respect, these behaviors merely illustrate their primitive nature. My research team has compiled extensive data on human weaknesses. A new hologram appeared, displaying human anatomy with highlighted vulnerability points. Their visual sensors function only within a narrow light spectrum, the scientist continued. Their auditory capabilities are similarly limited. They require constant intake of dihydrogen monoxide. Most critically, they are susceptible to a vast array of microscopic organisms that their immune systems cannot combat. David carefully recorded this too. It was fascinating how the Conclave species simultaneously feared humans while considering them weak. The cognitive dissonance would be almost comical if they weren't actively planning genocide. Ambassador Krizax gestured with his upper appendages. Precisely. Their vulnerabilities are numerous and easily exploited. The Quilothian Bioweapons Division has developed 17 different pathogens that would be lethal to humans while leaving other Earth organisms unaffected. A soft chime sounded, indicating another question. This time, it came from a being David couldn't immediately identify. A shimmering cloud of what looked like luminescent gas contained within a hovering mechanical shell. I represent the collective consciousness of Epsilon Eridani. The cloud pulsed as it spoke. We have observed human communications for several of their orbital cycles. Their entertainment broadcasts are perplexing. They appear to regularly contemplate their own extinction. Images flashed across the holographic display. Scenes from post-apocalyptic movies, zombie outbreaks, alien invasions. These are fictional scenarios they create for amusement, the consciousness continued. We find it statistically improbable that a species would derive pleasure from envisioning its own demise, unless they had evolved specific countermeasures for such eventualities. David almost choked, trying not to laugh. The alien had a point. Humans had been imagining every possible apocalypse scenario for centuries, and figuring out how to survive them, even if only in fiction. Krizax dismissed this with a wave. Their primitive entertainment serves only to distract them from their insignificance in the cosmos. It changes nothing about our proposed course of action. General Vexcor's mandibles clicked in disagreement. Ambassador, the collective raises a valid concern. Our intelligence suggests humans possess an unusual ability to anticipate threats through what they call imagination. This may explain why previous covert extinction attempts have failed. David's eyebrows shot up. Previous attempts? This was new information. He leaned forward slightly, ensuring his recording device captured every word. The asteroid redirect of their Paleolithic era was miscalculated, Vexcor continued. The atmospheric composition modification during their industrial development was neutralized. Even the subtle consciousness suppression field we deployed during their 1980s resulted only in a temporary cultural setback involving neon clothing and impractical hairstyles. The revelation sent murmurs through the audience. David fought to maintain his composure. Earth scientists had theories about the dinosaur extinction being unnatural, but confirmation that aliens had been trying to prevent human evolution for millions of years? That was big. A small furry creature with enormous eyes stood on spindly legs. The Meraxian Confederation suggests psychological warfare. Humans experience an emotion called existential dread when confronted with the vastness of space and their own mortality. Perhaps we could exploit this vulnerability. Krizax made that garbage disposal sound again. The Quilothian Dominion has no interest in psychological tactics. We prefer the certainty of biological extinction. The debate continued, with various species proposing increasingly elaborate methods for humanity's destruction. Everything from artificially accelerating their sun's life cycle to introducing subtle genetic modifications that would render future generations sterile. David recorded it all, fighting to maintain his disguise while his mind raced. Earth needed this intelligence desperately. The planet's unified defense force was still in its infancy, with only a handful of deep space vessels and orbital platforms. If the Conclave decided to move against humanity soon, the warning his intelligence provided might be the only advantage they'd have. As the seminar approached its third hour, David noticed something odd. Despite the genocidal topic, the discussion had taken on an almost academic tone, with species debating the merits of various extinction methods as casually as humans might discuss restaurant options. Finally, a tall, willowy being with 4 arms and skin like mother-of-pearl rose. David recognized Ambassador Talana of the Relaxian Federation, one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the Conclave. Esteemed colleagues, Talana's voice was melodic, almost hypnotic. I have observed these humans for over 30 of their generations. While I share concerns about their potential to disrupt galactic harmony, I must point out what no one else seems willing to acknowledge. The auditorium fell silent. Humans, Talana continued, are aware of us. Shocked murmurs rippled through the assembly. Impossible, Krizak sputtered. Their primitive technology cannot detect our cloaking fields. Their astronomical instruments are barely capable of observing neighboring star systems. Talana's forearms spread in a gesture of patient correction. I speak not of technological detection, but of intuitive awareness. For millennia, humans have created stories about beings from beyond their world. They look to the stars not with fear, but with anticipation. They have been expecting us. David felt a chill run down his spine. The ambassador wasn't wrong. Furthermore, Talana continued, our preliminary studies indicate that humans respond to threats in a unique manner. Most sentient species, when faced with overwhelming force, choose submission or retreat. Humans, paradoxically, become more aggressive when outmatched. General Vexcor's mandibles clicked rapidly. Ambassador Talana's assessment aligns with military intelligence. Human historical records show repeatedly that technological disadvantage often spurs rapid innovation. Their most significant scientific advancements frequently occur during periods of conflict. A holographic display showed the rapid technological evolution of human weapons, from spears to nuclear warheads, with accelerated development during war periods. The General and I propose an alternative approach, Talana said. Rather than risking a confrontation that might trigger unforeseen human adaptations, we should consider a policy of careful observation and controlled contact. Ambassador Krizak's 7 eyes blinked out of sequence, a sign of extreme agitation. The Qualathian Dominion rejects this cowardly approach. Humans are barely more than clever animals. Their extinction is inevitable. We merely propose to accelerate the timeline before they become a genuine threat. As the debate heated up, David noticed a small commotion at the auditorium entrance. Security drones were scanning attendees more thoroughly than when he'd arrived. Had someone detected his presence? He checked his holographic disguise controls. Everything was functioning normally. Then he saw her. Walking confidently down the center aisle was another alien that David immediately recognized as human despite the excellent disguise. Like him, she appeared to be a Zorthal diplomat, but David had spent enough time studying Conclave species to spot the subtle differences in movement and posture that betrayed her humanity. Another Earth agent? Here? David didn't recognize her, which meant she wasn't from his unit. Either UEDF had sent backup without informing him, or, more worryingly, Earth had multiple intelligence operations running simultaneously without coordination. The woman took a seat in the front row, directly in Ambassador Krizak's line of sight. Either she had nerves of steel or she was dangerously overconfident. Before we continue, Krizak announced, his voice cutting through the debate, security has informed me that we may have an uninvited guest among us. David's heart nearly stopped. Our quantum bioscanners have detected anomalous readings that suggest a non-conclave lifeform in this auditorium, the ambassador continued. Security protocols have been activated. Throughout the room, small spherical drones began circulating, emitting faint purple beams that swept over the attendees. David knew these were advanced scanners that could penetrate most disguises. He had seconds to decide, maintain cover or abort. The intelligence he'd gathered was too valuable to lose. If he could transmit it to the orbital relay before being discovered. But the mysterious human woman in the front row made an unexpected move. She stood up. Ambassador Krizak, she called out, her voice perfectly mimicking Zorthal vocal patterns. I must object to these scans. They interfere with the diplomatic immunity guaranteed by Conclave Charter, Section 7, Paragraph 12. David blinked in surprise. It was a bold move, citing actual Conclave law to prevent the scans. But would it work? Krizak's eyes narrowed. Identity yourself, delegate. I am Zerak, Special Envoy from the Zorthal mining operations in the Andromeda satellite galaxies, she replied smoothly. Our biochemistry is unique due to prolonged exposure to radiogenic ore. These scans are not only a violation of diplomatic protocol, but physically uncomfortable for my species. It was a brilliant deflection. Zorthal were known for their unusual biochemistry, which often triggered false readings on standard scanners. David watched as Krizak consulted with a security officer. Very well, the ambassador finally said. The scans will cease, but this seminar will adjourn for a short recess while we verify credentials. As the attendees began to file out for the break, David made a careful path toward the exit, avoiding direct contact with any security personnel. Once in the grand hallway outside the auditorium, he spotted the woman again. She was conversing casually with a group of actual Zorthal diplomats, perfectly mimicking their mannerisms. David needed to warn her about the security situation without blowing both their covers. He carefully positioned himself near her group, waiting for an opportunity. It came when the Zorthol diplomats moved toward the refreshment area. As the woman turned to follow them, David bumped into her slightly. "Pardon me, fellow delegate," he said in perfect Zorthol cadence. The security scans were most concerning. One might wonder what they were truly looking for. Her 7 eye stalks, all holographic projections, focused on him. There was a moment of calculation behind her disguise before she responded. "Indeed, perhaps someone is overreacting to shadows. The humans cannot possibly have infiltrated a conclave gathering." It was a careful acknowledgement. She knew what he was. "Perhaps we should discuss mining operations while we wait," David suggested. "I find the southeast corridor has excellent acoustics for private conversation." She inclined her head slightly. "An excellent suggestion, colleague." They made their way to the corridor, which David knew was one of the few areas in the Conclave citadel with minimal surveillance. Once relatively alone, he spoke in a low voice, still maintaining his alien appearance. "UEDF intelligence? CIA," she replied quietly. "You?" David felt a flash of irritation. "UEDF Special Operations. 8 months embedded. Your presence is compromising a long-term intelligence operation." "And your operation is interfering with established CIA protocols," she countered. "We've had surveillance assets in place for over 2 years. 2 years. That was impossible. Earth's first contact with confirmed alien technology had been just 30 months ago. "Look," David said, "we can sort out the jurisdictional mess later. Right now we have a bigger problem. The quantum bioscanners were activated because someone else triggered security protocols. There's a third party here." The woman, he still didn't know her name, and operational security meant he shouldn't ask, frowned beneath her disguise. "I detected nothing unusual. Trust me, those scans weren't for us. Our holographic tech is designed to fool Conclave systems. Whatever triggered the alert is something else entirely." She considered this. "We should extract separately. I have what I came for." "No," David said firmly. "The seminar isn't finished. They're about to present detailed plans for a potential first strike against Earth. That intel is critical." Before she could respond, an announcement echoed through the Citadel's communications system. "Attention all delegates. Security protocols have been elevated to level Sigma. The seminar will resume in 15 minutes with mandatory identity verification." They exchanged glances. "Level Sigma means molecular level scanning," David said. "Our disguises won't hold up." The woman nodded. "I have an extraction point at the diplomatic hangar. Bay 12. Too far. Security will lock down transit corridors first." David thought quickly. "There's a maintenance access near the secondary archives. It leads to the waste management level. From there we can reach the external hull and signal for extraction." "Bold plan," she said with a hint of admiration. "Lead the way, UEDF." They moved quickly but casually through the corridors, maintaining their disguises. David noticed increased security presence, both drones and actual Conclave officers. "Whatever spooked them, they're taking it seriously," he murmured. As they approached the maintenance access, a squad of security drones rounded the corner. David and the CIA agent smoothly shifted their conversation to Zorthol mining regulations without breaking stride. The drones paused, scanning them briefly before continuing on their patrol. Once they were gone, David accessed the maintenance hatch using codes he'd acquired months earlier. "How did you get those?" the woman asked as the hatch slid open. David smiled behind his disguise. "Believe it or not, I befriended a maintenance worker. Turns out the concept of happy hour translates across species." The maintenance shaft was narrow and dimly lit, designed for the smaller service drones rather than humanoid figures. They moved awkwardly, deactivating their holographic disguises to fit better in the confined space. With the disguises off, David got his first look at his unexpected ally. She was tall, athletic, with short-cropped blonde hair and the focused expression of someone used to high-stress situations. "Lieutenant David Miller," he said, offering a hand as they paused at a junction. "Agent Catherine Wells," she replied, shaking it briefly. "Let's save the pleasantries for when we're safely off this station." They continued downward, eventually reaching the waste management level, a vast, cavernous space filled with sophisticated recycling systems that processed the Citadel's refuse. "Charming," Catherine remarked, wrinkling her nose at the smell. "It gets better," David assured her. "The external access port is—" A sudden alarm blared throughout the level, and red warning lights began flashing. "That's not for us," David said, frowning. "That's a station-wide alert." Catherine pulled out a small device and checked the readings. "Quantum fluctuations throughout the Citadel. Something's happening in the central core." David's training kicked in. "We need to move, now." They sprinted across the waste management level, dodging automated recycling drones and processing units. The external access port was just visible ahead, a maintenance airlock used for hull repairs. As they reached it, the entire citadel shuddered violently. "What the hell was that?" Catherine demanded. David was already working on the airlock controls. "Nothing good. The sooner we're out of here, the better." The airlock opened with a hiss, revealing a small decompression chamber and equipment storage. They quickly donned emergency EVA suits stored for maintenance workers. "These will only give us about 30 minutes of life support," David warned. "My extraction vessel is on the far side of the Citadel's defensive perimeter." Catherine tapped her wrist device. "My team can be here in 12 minutes if I can get a signal out." Another violent shudder ran through the station, stronger this time. Warning lights intensified. "Whatever's happening, it's accelerating," David said as he finished sealing his suit. "Ready?" Catherine nodded, helmet secure. David activated the outer airlock door. It slid open, revealing the breathtaking vista of space beyond, and the alarming sight of the Citadel's defense systems fully activated. Energy shields shimmered around the massive structure, and weapon platforms were rotating into firing positions. "They're preparing for an attack," Catherine observed. "But from whom?" They stepped out onto the hull, magnetic boots keeping them secured to the surface. From this external vantage point, they could see parts of the Citadel lighting up with activity, and something else. A massive vessel was approaching from the darkness of space. Unlike the elegant, organic designs of Conclave ships, this craft was angular, aggressive, and entirely unfamiliar. "That's not one of ours," David said unnecessarily. Catherine was using her suit's enhanced optics to study the approaching ship. "It's not matching any known Conclave design either. Unknown origin." The mysterious vessel continued its approach, seemingly unconcerned by the Citadel's formidable defenses. As it drew closer, smaller craft began to deploy from its hull, dozens, then hundreds of them. Boarding parties, David realized aloud. The Citadel's defense systems opened fire, energy beams and projectile weapons targeting the incoming swarm. Many of the small craft were destroyed instantly, but their sheer numbers ensured that many more got through. Catherine activated her communication system. "Extraction team, this is Bluebird. Priority 1 extraction required at coordinates." Static filled the channel. "They're jamming communications," she said grimly. David was calculating options. "We have 25 minutes of air. We can try to circle around to the diplomatic hangar. If we can reach a ship—" "Look," Catherine pointed. One of the small alien craft had attached itself to the hull less than 50 meters from their position. It was roughly cylindrical, with what appeared to be mechanical appendages securing it to the Citadel's surface. As they watched, the craft began to cut through the hull with a superheated beam. "They're breaching the station," David said. "The Conclave is under attack." Catherine gave him a pointed look through her helmet visor. "Not our problem. Our mission is to get this intelligence back to Earth." She was right, of course. Their primary responsibility was to their mission. Yet David couldn't help feeling that they were witnessing something historic. First contact between the Conclave and some unknown species, and it was hostile. "Wait," he said, studying the breaching craft more carefully. "Those markings, they're not random patterns." Catherine followed his gaze. "What are you seeing?" "It almost looks like—" David's voice trailed off as realization dawned. "That's English, distorted, but definitely English." "Impossible," Catherine breathed. Yet as they watched, more of the small craft attached to the hull nearby, each bearing similar markings. One rotated into view, and there was no mistaking it. The craft bore the letters UEDF, followed by a serial number. "Those are ours," David said in disbelief. "But that's impossible." "Earth doesn't have this technology." Catherine's expression hardened. "Unless someone's been holding out. CIA has suspected that certain corporate interests have been developing advanced tech based on recovered alien artifacts." Before David could respond, his suit's communication system crackled to life, no longer jammed. "Attention UEDF personnel," a voice announced clearly. "This is Admiral Helena Zhang of the UEDF Vanguard. We have detected your beacons. Remain in position for extraction." David and Catherine exchanged stunned looks. "What beacon?" Catherine demanded. David tapped his suit controls, scanning for active transmissions. "It's coming from us, from our intelligence-gathering devices. They're homing in on the technology." "This is Lieutenant Miller and Agent Wells," David responded to the transmission. "We have critical intelligence regarding Conclave plans against Earth. Request immediate extraction." "Acknowledged, Lieutenant," came the reply. "Extraction team en route to your position. Be advised, we are conducting a full-scale offensive against the Conclave Citadel. The diplomatic approach has failed." "Failed?" David had received no such updates from command. As far as he knew, Earth was still pursuing cautious observation and intelligence gathering. A smaller craft detached from the main vessel and maneuvered toward their position. Unlike the breaching vehicles, This one was clearly designed for personnel transport. As it approached, David could see it was indeed of Earth manufacture, but far more advanced than anything he'd been briefed on. It looked like UEDF design language, but several generations ahead of current technology. The craft extended a docking tube that sealed against the hull near them. A hatch opened, and a figure in an advanced combat spacesuit emerged, gesturing for them to approach. With few alternatives, David and Catherine made their way to the extraction vessel. Once inside, they were greeted by a small team of soldiers in uniforms bearing UEDF insignia, but with subtle differences that David didn't recognize. As the hatch sealed behind them and the atmosphere normalized, they removed their helmets. "Lieutenant Miller, Agent Wells." A woman in an officer's uniform approached them. "Commander Alexis Reed, welcome aboard the Harrier." David studied her carefully. "Commander, with all due respect, what the hell is going on? The UEDF doesn't have this level of technology." Commander Reed's expression remained professional, but there was a hint of understanding in her eyes. "That's a complicated question, Lieutenant. Admiral Zhang will brief you fully once we return to the Vanguard." "The Vanguard?" Catherine interjected. "There's no UEDF vessel with that designation." "There is now," Reed replied. "We launched 3 months ago." "That's impossible," David said firmly. "I've been embedded in the Conclave for 8 months. I would have been informed of such a significant development." Reed glanced at a datapad. "Lieutenant David Miller, UEDF Special Operations, deployed to Conclave infiltration mission on October 17, 2157. Is that correct?" David stared at her. 2157, it's 2053. A moment of silence filled the compartment. "I think I see the problem," Reed said finally. "What's the last Earth date you remember before your mission?" "May 3rd, 2053, David replied without hesitation. Catherine nodded in agreement. "My mission parameters listed the same time frame." Commander Reed sighed. "Lieutenant Agent, I'm afraid there's been a temporal displacement. Today's date is August 22nd, 2157. David felt as though the artificial gravity had suddenly increased. "That's impossible. I've been here 8 months, not over a century." "The Conclave has technology that affects temporal perception," Reed explained. "We believe they've been using it on human infiltrators, making them experience time at a different rate. It's why we launched this rescue operation." The vessel shuddered slightly as it detached from the Citadel and began its journey back to the larger ship. "This is a rescue operation?" Catherine asked skeptically. "It looks more like an invasion." "It's both," Reed admitted. "After we discovered what happened to our early infiltration teams, diplomatic options were exhausted. The Conclave refused to acknowledge their temporal manipulation or their plans against Earth." David's mind was racing. "The seminar I was attending, they were discussing methods to eliminate humanity." Reed nodded grimly. "We know. It's been going on for decades. Your intelligence transmissions from earlier missions helped us understand the full scope of their intentions." "Earlier missions? I never transmitted any intelligence," David objected. "From your perspective, no," Reed explained. "But we've been receiving data packets from your recording devices for years. Fragments transmitted during brief temporal synchronizations." Catherine leaned forward. "You're saying we've been sending intelligence back without knowing it? For over a century?" "Precisely," Reed confirmed. "The Conclave's temporal manipulation had an unintended side effect. It created quantum entanglement between your recording devices and our receivers. Every time they adjusted the temporal field, we received another data packet." The transport vessel approached the massive Earthship. Up close, it was even more impressive. Clearly human in design, but incorporating technologies David couldn't begin to comprehend. "Welcome to the UEDF Vanguard," Reed said as they docked. "Earth's first true battleship." As they disembarked, David and Catherine were led through corridors bustling with activity. Crew members nodded respectfully as they passed, some even stopping to stare. "Why are they looking at us like that?" Catherine whispered. Reed overheard. "Because you're legends, Agent Wells. The intelligence you and Lieutenant Miller provided formed the foundation of Earth's defense strategy for the past century. Your missions were classified at the highest levels, but every UEDF officer knows your names." They were brought to a briefing room where a distinguished woman in an admiral's uniform waited. She stood as they entered. "Lieutenant Miller, Agent Wells," she said with genuine respect. "I'm Admiral Helena Zhang. It's an honor to finally meet you both." David saluted reflexively. "Admiral, we have questions." "I imagine you do," Zhang replied with a smile. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." As they took their seats, displays activated around the room, showing the ongoing battle at the Conclave Citadel. Earth forces were clearly gaining the upper hand, with precision strikes targeting specific sections rather than causing wholesale destruction. "This isn't an extermination mission," Zhang explained, noting their attention to the displays. We're neutralizing their military capabilities and seizing their temporal technology. Earth has no interest in becoming what we fought against. Admiral, Catherine said carefully. Commander Reed mentioned temporal displacement. Are you saying we've actually lost over a century? Zhang's expression softened. Yes and no. You've experienced 8 months while 104 years passed on Earth. But we've developed technology to help integrate you back into your proper timeline. How? David asked. The same temporal technology the Conclave used against you, Zhang replied. Reversed and refined. We can't send you back, but we can synchronize your temporal perception with Earth Standard Time. David tried to process this. And our families, friends, everyone we knew. Gone, Zhang acknowledged gently. I won't pretend this will be easy, but you should know that your sacrifices meant something. Earth is now a respected power in the galaxy, because we had advance warning of the Conclave's intentions. Catherine leaned forward. The seminar today, was it just for our benefit? A way to ensure we'd gather the intelligence you already had? Zhang shook her head. No. The Conclave genuinely believes it's still 2053 in your perception. They've been running these seminars regularly for decades, refining their plans. What you witnessed today was their latest strategy session, which we just interrupted rather dramatically, David observed, gesturing to the battle displays. Yes, Zhang confirmed. After a century of preparation, Earth decided it was time to act. Your extraction was prioritized as part of the operation. David struggled to reconcile everything he was hearing. A century had passed. Everyone he knew was long dead. Earth had advanced far beyond anything he could have imagined. And yet, here he was, still the same age he'd been when the mission began. What happens now? He finally asked. First, we complete this operation, Zhang said. Then we return to Earth, where you'll both receive the most advanced medical and psychological support available. After that, well, that will be up to you. Your knowledge of the Conclave from direct infiltration remains valuable, even with the temporal gap. Or you could choose to retire with full honors. Earth owes you that choice, at minimum. Catherine had been studying the tactical displays intently. This attack pattern, it's targeting their temporal research facilities specifically. Zhang nodded, impressed. You have a good eye, Agent Wells. Yes, our primary objective is their temporal technology. We believe they've been using it not just against our agents, but to manipulate events throughout human history. David remembered General Vexcor's comments about previous extinction attempts. The dinosaur extinction? The atmospheric changes? The 1980s? All Conclave interference, Zhang confirmed. They've been trying to prevent or control human development for millions of years. Each failure only made them more determined. A communication officer entered and whispered something to Zhang. The Admiral nodded and turned back to them. The Citadel's central core has been secured. We've captured their temporal manipulation technology intact. How did Earth advance so quickly? David asked. Even with our intelligence, this level of technology seems impossible? Zhang finished for him. It wasn't just your intelligence, though that was crucial. Once we understood what we were facing, humanity united in a way few thought possible. Nations pooled resources. Corporations shared proprietary technologies. Scientific breakthroughs were immediately implemented rather than held back for profit or political advantage. Fear is a powerful motivator, Catherine observed. Not fear, Zhang corrected. Determination. Your intelligence revealed that the Conclave considered us primitive, weak, and easily exterminated. Humanity took that as a challenge. The displays showed Earth forces securing different sections of the Citadel. Conclave representatives were being escorted, not as prisoners, but under guard. Are you arresting them? David asked. No. We're inviting them to diplomatic talks, Zhang said with a slight smile. On Earth's terms this time. Catherine raised an eyebrow. They were literally just discussing how to exterminate us. Yes, Zhang acknowledged. And now they'll discuss how to coexist with us. The Conclave respects strength and strategic thinking. By demonstrating both, we've earned a place at their table. David couldn't help but laugh. So all those extinction plans they were debating will never be implemented, Zhang finished. Instead, they'll be studying why their previous attempts failed so spectacularly. A thought occurred to David. Admiral, you said we've been transmitting intelligence for years through temporal synchronizations. Does that mean that we knew exactly when and where to find you? David asked. Precisely, Zhang confirmed. We've been planning this extraction for decades, waiting for the optimal moment when you'd have gathered the most critical intelligence and when the Conclave would be most vulnerable. Catherine shook her head in amazement. So while we thought we were running covert operations, we were actually part of a century-long strategic plan. In a manner of speaking, yes, Zhang said. though the plan evolved considerably as we received more intelligence from your temporal transmissions. David leaned back in his chair, trying to absorb everything. Admiral, you mentioned a third party at the seminar. The security scans weren't just looking for us. Zhang's expression turned serious. Correct. The Conclave detected another infiltrator, one they genuinely feared. Who? Catherine asked. The Vexillians, Zhang replied. A species even the Conclave considers dangerous. Well, the simplest explanation is that they're predators who hunt technologically advanced civilizations. David recalled something from the seminar. There was a representative there, a shimmering cloud in a mechanical shell. The collective consciousness of Epsilon Eridani. Zhang nodded grimly. That wasn't the real collective. The Vexillians mimic other species to infiltrate their governments and societies. They study a civilization's weaknesses before revealing themselves and demanding submission. And they're interested in humans too? Catherine asked. They're interested in anyone the Conclave sees as a potential threat, Zhang explained. Your presence at that seminar inadvertently helped us identify a Vexillian infiltrator within the Conclave. That's intelligence we couldn't have acquired any other way. A tactical officer approached with another update. Zhang listened, then turned back to them with satisfaction. The Conclave leadership has requested a ceasefire and diplomatic talks. They're impressed by our technological leap. If I might ask, Admiral, David said carefully, what exactly are Earth's terms going to be? Zhang smiled. Equal membership in the Conclave with all the rights and privileges therein. Access to their technological database. Reparations for temporal interference in human development. And a binding non-aggression pact. Ambitious, Catherine commented. But achievable, Zhang replied confidently. We're not going to make the mistake of overreaching. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We just want our rightful place in it. David thought about everything he'd seen at the seminar. All the plans to eliminate humanity before they could reach the stars. They underestimated us. They did, Zhang agreed. A mistake they won't make again. The briefing room door opened, and Commander Reed returned with a medical team. Admiral, the medical staff is ready to begin the temporal synchronization procedure for Lieutenant Miller and Agent Wells. Zhang nodded. Very good. I'll leave you in their capable hands. Once you've been synchronized and had time to adjust, we'll speak again. She stood and offered her hand to each of them. On behalf of Earth and all humanity, thank you. Your sacrifice and service have made this day possible. As Zhang departed, the medical team began preparing equipment that looked like something out of science fiction to David's 2053 perspective. The procedure is non-invasive, a doctor explained, noticing David's apprehension. We'll use a focused temporal field to gradually adjust your personal time stream until it synchronizes with current standard time. Will it hurt? Catherine asked bluntly. The doctor smiled reassuringly. No physical pain, though you may experience some cognitive dissonance as your mind adjusts to the new temporal perception. Most patients report it feels like an unusually vivid dream state. As the medical team worked, David turned to Catherine. So CIA, huh? I thought I knew all the intelligence assets in the field. She smiled slightly. That was rather the point, Lieutenant. Though I suppose interagency rivalries seem pretty trivial now. Just a bit, David agreed. Especially considering we've both been inadvertently working together for a century. One of the doctors approached with what appeared to be neural interfaces. We're ready to begin the synchronization. Please lie back and try to relax. As David reclined on the medical bed, he found himself thinking about the seminar, about all those alien species so confidently discussing humanity's weaknesses and how to exploit them. You know what's ironic? He said to Catherine on the adjacent bed. All those extinction plans they were debating. They never once considered that we might be listening. Catherine laughed. Humanity, fuck yeah. Indeed, the doctor said with a smile as he placed the neural interface on David's temple. That's become something of a motto for us over the past century. Now, please count backward from 10. David began counting, but before he reached 7, his consciousness expanded in a way he couldn't have imagined. Information flowed into his mind, not as raw data, but as lived experience. He wasn't just being told about the past century. In some strange way, he was experiencing echoes of it. He saw Earth's nations uniting against the Conclave threat. The rapid advancement of technology as reverse-engineered alien artifacts yielded breakthrough after breakthrough. The first true Earth battleship being constructed in orbit. Colonies established on Mars, Europa, Titan. Diplomatic missions to nearby star systems not aligned with the Conclave. And through it all, a persistent theme. The intelligence he and Catherine had gathered was guiding Earth's development, warning of pitfalls, identifying opportunities. When David opened his eyes again, he felt different. His memories were the same, but his perception had shifted. The century gap that had seemed so insurmountable now felt like a strange but navigable distance. "How do you feel?" the doctor asked, checking his vital signs. "Like I've been asleep for 100 years, David replied, surprised to find his sense of humor intact. But also present, connected. Catherine was already sitting up on her bed, looking similarly disoriented but alert. "It worked, didn't it? I can feel the temporal difference now." The doctor nodded, satisfied. "Your neural patterns are successfully synchronized with current standard time. You'll continue to integrate more fully over the next few days, but the dissonance should be minimal." Commander Reed entered the medical bay. "Admiral Zhang asked me to update you. The diplomatic talks have begun, and they're proceeding better than expected. The Conclave representatives are, well, I wouldn't say frightened, but they're certainly reassessing their opinions about humanity. I imagine showing up with technology they thought was centuries beyond us made an impression," David observed. "That, and the fact that we specifically targeted their temporal manipulation facilities while leaving their civilian sections untouched," Reed confirmed. "Precision counts for a lot in galactic politics, apparently." Catherine stood, testing her balance. "What about the Vexillian infiltrator?" "Contained," Reed said with satisfaction. "Once exposed, they attempted to transmit data to their homeworld, but our quantum scramblers prevented it. We've gained valuable intelligence on their capabilities and methods." David felt a sudden wave of exhaustion, not physical but emotional. A century. Everyone he'd known was gone. The world he'd left behind was transformed beyond recognition. Yet humanity had survived, thrived even, in part because of what he and Catherine had done. "You know," he said quietly, "during the seminar they kept talking about human weaknesses. Our fragile bodies, our short lifespans, our limited senses. But they never understood our greatest strength." "Which is?" Reed asked. David smiled. "We know we're not alone in the universe, and we've always been preparing for this moment. In our stories, our dreams, even our nightmares, humans have been expecting aliens, friendly or otherwise, for generations. We were ready for them before we even knew they existed." Reed nodded thoughtfully. "That's been our edge. The Conclave species evolved in isolation, secure in their technological superiority. Humans evolved looking over our shoulders, always anticipating predators or competitors. We're hardwired for survival against the unknown." A communication chimed, and Reed checked her device. "Admiral Zhang is requesting your presence at the diplomatic talks," she announced, looking surprised. "This is unprecedented. Newly synchronized individuals aren't typically invited to high-level negotiations." "Maybe she wants to show off her secret weapons," Catherine suggested dryly. Reed smiled. "More likely, she wants the Conclave representatives to see the faces of the humans who outwitted them for 8 months, and helped Earth prepare for over a century." As they followed Reed through the corridors of the Vanguard, David noticed crew members stopping to watch them pass. Some offered respectful nods. Others looked on with barely concealed awe. "I feel like an exhibit," Catherine muttered. "In a way you are," Reed replied honestly. "Your missions became required study at the Academy. There are historical dramas about your infiltrations. To these people, you're figures from history books suddenly walking among them." They reached the ship's diplomatic section, where armed guards stood at attention outside an ornate door bearing the seal of Earth. Though it had evolved from the United Nations symbol, David remembered to something more encompassing, with representations of Mars and other colonies integrated into the design. Inside, Admiral Zhang was seated at a large circular table across from several Conclave representatives. David recognized Ambassador Krizax and General Vexcor among them, both looking significantly less confident than they had during the seminar. "Ah, excellent timing," Zhang said as they entered. "Representatives of the Conclave, may I present Lieutenant David Miller and Agent Catherine Wells of Earth Intelligence Services." The aliens' reactions were immediate and unmistakable. Krizax's 7 eyes blinked rapidly in sequence, a sign of extreme shock in Quilothians. Vexcor's mandibles clicked so violently that the general had to physically restrain them with one appendage. "Impossible," Krizax hissed. "These humans were at the strategic seminar mere hours ago." "Indeed they were," Zhang confirmed pleasantly. "They've been providing Earth with intelligence on Conclave activities and plans for quite some time. The temporal field should have prevented any transmissions," General Vexcor insisted, mandibles still twitching erratically. Zhang smiled. "Should have, yes. That miscalculation has proven rather costly for the Conclave, wouldn't you agree?" David suddenly understood why the Admiral had invited them. This wasn't just a diplomatic negotiation, it was psychological warfare. Earth was demonstrating that it had not only overcome the Conclave's temporal manipulation, but had turned it to their advantage. "Please join us," Zhang invited, gesturing to empty seats beside her. As David and Catherine took their places, Ambassador Talana of the Rylaxians, who David recognized from the seminar, leaned forward with all four arms folded in a gesture of respectful contemplation. "I cautioned the Conclave about underestimating humans," Talana said, her melodic voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "Perhaps now my colleagues will recognize the wisdom in cooperation rather than elimination. The Quillathian Dominion does not recognize humans as equals," Krizak sputtered, his dignified facade crumbling. This technological display does not change the fundamental truth that humans are primitive, short-lived creatures who just defeated your defenses, captured your most advanced technology, and forced you to the negotiating table." Catherine interrupted coolly. "Those primitive, short-lived creatures?" Krizak fell silent, his 7 eyes fixed on her with what David recognized as the Quillathian equivalent of stunned disbelief. "The Conclave has existed for millennia," General Vexcor said, regaining some composure. "We have weathered many challenges from emerging species. This setback does not alter the fundamental balance of power in the galaxy." "No," Zhang agreed surprisingly. "It doesn't. And Earth has no desire to disrupt that balance, only to claim our rightful place within it." She activated a holographic display showing the terms Earth was proposing. As David scanned them, he was impressed by their restraint. Earth wasn't demanding reparations for past interference beyond access to certain technologies. There were no punitive measures, no territorial demands, nothing that could be construed as humiliating to the Conclave. "These terms are unexpectedly reasonable," Ambassador Talana observed, her forearms moving in a gesture of approval. "Earth understands the value of stable interstellar relations," Zhang replied. "We have no interest in conquest or dominance, only in ensuring our security and advancing our civilization alongside others." Krizak was studying the terms with obvious suspicion. "And if the Conclave rejects these terms?" Zhang's expression didn't change, but her voice took on a steely quality. "Then we would be forced to demonstrate more fully the capabilities we've developed. The precision strike you witnessed today utilized less than 15% of the Vanguard's combat systems." A chilly silence fell over the room. "Perhaps," General Vexcor said carefully, mandibles now perfectly still, "the Conclave should consider these terms as a starting point for a new relationship with Earth." David caught Catherine's eye across the table, sharing a moment of quiet amazement. In the span of a day, from their perspective, they had gone from spying on a seminar about humanity's destruction to witnessing humanity's emergence as a galactic power. The negotiations continued for hours, with various technical and legal details being debated. David and Catherine were primarily observers, occasionally providing context about their experiences when relevant to the discussions. As the session neared its conclusion, Ambassador Talana turned her attention directly to David. "Lieutenant Miller," she said in her melodic voice, "during our seminar, you heard our assessment of human weaknesses. I am curious, what would you say are the Conclave's weaknesses?" The question silenced the room. It was bold, perhaps even provocative, but David sensed genuine curiosity rather than hostility in the ambassador's manner. After a thoughtful pause, he answered, "Complacency. The Conclave has existed for so long that it began to see itself as the natural order of the galaxy rather than one political arrangement among many possibilities. That led to stagnation in certain areas, particularly in understanding emerging species like humans." He continued, warming to the topic. "You studied our physical limitations extensively, but missed something fundamental about human psychology. We thrive on challenges. Tell a human something is impossible, and we immediately start figuring out how to do it anyway. The very act of planning our extinction spurred the rapid advancement that brought us here today." Talana's forearms moved in what David now recognized as thoughtful consideration. "A profound observation, Lieutenant. Perhaps there is wisdom the Conclave could gain from humans, just as there is technology humans could gain from the Conclave. That," Admiral Zhang said, "is precisely the foundation for the partnership we're proposing." As the session concluded with preliminary agreements established, David found himself experiencing a complex mix of emotions. Pride in humanity's achievement, grief for the world and people he had lost to temporal displacement, satisfaction in knowing his mission had contributed to Earth's security and advancement. When they departed the diplomatic chamber, Commander Reed escorted them to a viewing deck where they could see both the Conclave Citadel, now partially under Earth control, and the stunning expanse of space beyond. "What happens now?" David asked quietly, watching shuttles move between the Vanguard and the Citadel. "For Earth, a new chapter in our history," Reed replied. "For you two personally, whatever you want within reason. You've earned that much and more." Catherine was gazing out at the stars. "I never imagined my mission would end like this." A century passed. Earth a galactic power. Everything I knew gone. Not everything, Reed said gently. The world has changed, but humans are still humans. We still create art, fall in love, argue about politics, wonder about our place in the universe. Some things never change. David thought about the seminar, about all those alien species discussing humanity's weaknesses, as if they were cataloging specimens. They really had no idea what they were dealing with, did they? Reed smiled. No. And that's the greatest irony of all. In trying to eliminate humanity before we could reach the stars, they gave us exactly the motivation and information we needed to get here ahead of schedule. Humanity, fuck yeah, Catherine said again, this time with a genuine laugh. David joined her laughter, finding unexpected joy in the absurdity of their situation. They had been embedded aliens studying a conference on killing humans, only to discover they were part of a century-long human plan to outmaneuver those very same aliens. As they stood there, watching Earthships secure a place among the stars, David recalled something General Vexcor had said during the seminar about humans having an unusual ability to anticipate threats through imagination. The general had been more right than he knew. Humans had been preparing for this moment through stories, films, and dreams for generations. They had imagined every possible way aliens might try to destroy them, and in doing so, had inadvertently prepared themselves for the real thing. You know, David said, watching an Earth shuttle dock with the Conclave Citadel, if those aliens had just invited us to join them in the first place, instead of plotting our extinction, they could have saved themselves a lot of trouble. True, Reed agreed. But then, humans might have taken much longer to develop the technology we have now. Nothing motivates innovation like survival. As they continued watching the historic events unfold before them, David couldn't help but smile at the ultimate irony. The Conclave had held a seminar on killing humans, not realizing that humans had been listening all along, and that their very attempts to eliminate humanity had ensured humanity's place among the stars. Humanity had not only survived, it had thrived. And as the Earthships moved confidently through space, establishing their presence in the galactic community, David knew that the future, however strange and unexpected, would be fascinating. Humanity, fuck yeah indeed. The end.